I have a friend that's named after a cow that she was brought up called Daisy.
And Daisy was a milk cow?
I think so, yeah. I mean, she might have ended up getting killed, but who knows? Yeah.
And how did Daisy? Well, why did Daisy produce milk?
Well, I guess for the local community.
But from a biological perspective, why did she?
Well, technically, like for anyone, it would be for their young. So, but that doesn't mean. I mean, it does mean that obviously it's not there for us. I can see what you're trying to get at, say, making me feel like it's not there for us to take it.
So just before we start, I just want to confirm that you're aware you're being filmed and you're happy to be filmed.
Yeah, no, completely, yeah.
So I'm here with kind of a banner, and the banner has a statement that just says, you can't love animals and eat them. And I've asked, change my mind, and if you disagree with me, I'd be interested to know kind of on what points you disagree with me with.
I do disagree, but only to a certain extent. I don't have anything else against vegan. I'm like a disclaimer before I start talking. Nothing wrong with veganism at all. Personally, I'm not a vegan. But where I come from, Somerset, it's very farm country, farm orientated. I grew up with like communities of farms. We do stuff with farms in school, secondary school, even up to college. So the whole thing with loving an animal and eating it, I don't agree with this necessarily. When you have the animal on your farm as a 5-year-old boy or girl or a chicken, a goat, whatever it is, you bring it up for a year and you kill it and you eat it for a Sunday roast with your family. I don't see a problem with that because it's kind of self-sufficient. Right. But even then, in a terms of sense that you have farming communities that are then rotated around a village. So our village, we used to have 3 farms in our village, and we would come together, families eating their meat, but the local restaurants as well would source their meat from local farms, which I don't have a problem with. Is the whole thing that I would have a problem with and do is the mass production of meat. Cowspiracy, stuff like that you find in documentaries.
There seems to be a recurring thing that people say is, the issue is often with the mass production of meats, rather than say the local farms. And so, with the local farms, with the mass production, is it an ethical thing you have a problem with, or is it?
Definitely the ethical thing. More like I never watched them. I always knew they were on Netflix stuff. Never watched them. Then did watch them, and it kind of changed my mind. And there was another thing that I watched. I think it was Forensic Files or something, and it was something about hormones in meat as well. Yeah. So the dangerous side effects of not farming, killing cows properly. There's something in the glands that when I can't remember, it was somewhere in America where they killed a cow in like a murder house. I don't know what it's called, manslaughter, that thing. And so the hormones in the cow's throat then got into human meat consumption, and there was loads of health complications, but also stuff about, I think it was cowspiracy with the hormones in milk as well for kids, pure milk. So it's all very dangerous. You've got to be careful about how you're consuming these certain products, I guess. But it's more the ethical side, I guess, is what I have a problem with.
And so can you give me some examples from an ethical, just from the hormones, just before, I will ask you the question, with the hormones, are the hormones naturally found in meat, or are the hormones only there as a result, say dairy, are they only there as a result of bad farming practices?
Well, I wouldn't know personally. I think it was bad farming practices that it was in the milk on the documentary I watched. And the same with the health condition when they had hormones in the glandular throat thing in the cow. So I guess it's kind of more with how it's mass-produced. That's when they start to have a problem. But, I mean, you can have the same problems in local farming as well. It's more when you grow up with the animals and you get to see them. When you watch something like Cowspiracy or the one that I always remember is the tray of the chicks. Oh, yeah. So that's one that always sticks in my head because it is upsetting, and it depends like what your view on veganism or eating meat is. It's still upsetting to watch. So it comes from that. How are you going to get to people using emotion as to get to your target market of saying this is why we shouldn't eat as much mass-produced meat, this is why we shouldn't mass-produce meat, this is why we should have ethical farming that is only done locally, sourced locally, and distributed locally.
So just to interject quickly, so the reason I asked about the hormones thing was just because in dairy, estrogens are naturally occurring hormone that's found in breast milk because it comes from a female mammal. So even in a local, even in organic, unpasteurized, raw, whatever situation, there'll always be estrogen, the hormones in there, which is not great for us to consume. The question I was going to ask before I sidetracked my own self was can you name some specific examples that happen in industrialized farming that you find to be unethical?
Not that I can remember from Cowspiracy. I think it was just the treatment of the animals. Like, I mean, we even when growing up, I would see the farm next door where they used to milk the cows was like an open barn. So you can see them like being in their own separate cages, which is fine for me. Like we milk them for milk. I don't have like I've always drunk dairy, well, milk specifically. Like I've always loved milk, and I think it's more not so much I don't know what it's called when they are in their separate containers. It's more when there's just like a load of them, or the chickens. I think that was on Cowspiracy as well, where they had just a giant room full of chickens, and there's no like hutches. They literally live and eat and breathe in their own feces, pretty much.
Yeah, which is like 98% of chicken production. The reason I was pressing on like specific kind of practices in intensive farming, because I wanted to kind of see if we could draw any parallels between what happens in intensive farming and what happens in local farming. So you mentioned dairy, and dairy is an interesting one. Do you think that anything happens in local dairy farming that's different to intensive dairy farming, or are the practices somewhat similar?
I wouldn't know. Like, I mean, I don't.
Sorry, I'm really sorry to interject then, but you've been on dairy farms yourself when you were younger?
Yeah, well, I was 5, 6. I don't specifically remember that. But I think dairy farming, they care a lot more for the animals. Like they don't have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Maybe they do if it's like a big family, and there's different farms across the whole, well, Somerset or whatever. But one individual farm with about 2 or 3 fields, they won't have 1,000, 12,000 cows. So they get to know the animals and they name them, and they get them like, you've got like stuff like Daisy. I have a friend that's named after a cow that she was brought up called Daisy.
And Daisy was a milk cow?
I think so, yeah. I mean, she might have ended up getting killed, but who knows? Yeah.
And how did Daisy? Well, why did Daisy produce milk?
Well, I guess for the local community.
But from a biological perspective, why did she?
Well, technically, like for anyone, it would be for their young. So, but that doesn't mean. I mean, it does mean that obviously it's not there for us. I can see what you're trying to get at, say, making me feel like it's not there for us to take it. But I mean, you can say that with a lot of things in human society. It's also not there for us to take it, but we still do. Oil and plastic. I guess with animals, because they are living and breathing, it's the same thing, but slightly different because they're living things.
That's interesting. And I think with oil and plastic, interestingly, what we probably both agree on is that we should probably not be using oil and plastic.
Yeah, completely.
So it's interesting. But okay, so how did they get Daisy pregnant then? If she had to produce milk for her baby, how did they get Daisy to produce a baby?
Probably with one of the other bulls, I guess, because there's normally. I think with animals, it's obviously seen as a lot different. You have 1 male and 20 females. And the same with humans in some aspect. There's the other documentary about 1 man and 3 wives. You have one man and 3 husbands, which I mean, it stems back to a whole kind of sexism thing, but and mass production. But I'm pretty sure there was like 1 or 2 bulls and about 10, 20 cows on the farm.
And do you think that they let the bulls just mate randomly, or did they? I guess the point I'm trying to it's probably state, right, is farmers can only impregnate cows during their kind of through the period where they're fertile, right? Like humans are not fertile every day of the year. It's only a specific time. So the farmer has to have them on a cycle, and he has to get them pregnant in that specific time. So do you think that the farmer's more likely to have a bull running around dangerously mating, or do you think that they would do something like artificial insemination to make sure that was happening on the schedule they needed?
I don't know. When I was growing up, I probably wouldn't know about artificial insemination. I don't know, maybe now. I mean, I don't go home that much, so I don't really know. I don't keep in touch with my friends that were farmers. But I guess maybe there is a thing, artificial insemination. But again, humans do that as well, like IVF treatment, stuff like that.
On a consensual basis? I
guess so, yeah. I mean, even with a cow, you can't talk to a cow and be like, do you want me to get you pregnant? It's the kind of, the advancement of humans is what everything turns back to. Oil, plastic, cows, meat-eating is for the advancement of humans. You need protein to make you stronger. You need stuff like that to make you healthy or whatever. But I don't necessarily agree with it being mass-produced, especially in countries like America, where the population is so big that they have all this stuff to make for it, to keep up with the demands.
They keep up with the demand is kind of the key thing, and the reason. the reason that we've factory farm isn't because we're inherently cruel and we want to see animals suffer necessarily. It's just because it's the only way we can do it that's in at all economically or environmentally sustainable for the demand that's in place. Do you think that I'll move past this dairy point because I feel like I'll probably run it dry. But do you think with the with Daisy, we said about consent. Now, of course, we can't have a literal consent, but we could probably have maybe an inferred consent, right? Or maybe an inferred lack of consent. So do you think that Daisy would be happy if she had the choice or the free will that we have to be, say, artificially inseminated or forcibly impregnated, to then have a child and then to have her child taken away from her? Because obviously if Daisy's having children, Daisy's children can't drink her milk because that's less milk for us to sell to wherever it is, local communities or whatever. So do you think that can we infer maybe a lack of consent on Daisy's part, that she'd rather be a maternal matriarch like she would in nature rather than have her children continuously taken away from her?
So you're asking which... I'm confused now. Can you say that again?
So the question was about consent, and you made the very valid point, which is an animal can never literally consent to us, and like obviously we can. And so the point is, without that consent, then how can we necessarily, be able to pick up on the fact that they wouldn't be happy with it happening? But do you think that animals, because they have the capacity to suffer, they have the capacity to have emotions, however basic or complex they may be, the fact that they have that ability to feel pain and suffer and feel happiness and joy, can we maybe infer that they would rather not be forcibly impregnated, not have their babies taken away from, and not be exploited and then ultimately killed? Can we infer that maybe that's what they would rather not have done to them?
Yeah, it's obviously what everyone would rather. Everyone with a conscience would not rather have it done to them. And then you watch other stuff. The documentaries are amazingly appealing to me about how eye-opening they are nowadays. The other one on the other two that I watched were the Cove, about the dolphins. I was really upset. And then the other one was Blackfish. So you see that mothers and sons is something that everyone touches on, and not just in farming but in the dolphin documentary, the Cove and everything. And it's everyone can really relate to it, but I mean most people can relate to it. I don't really relate to it at all. So it's like having someone taken away from their mum, you're fine without your mum. As long as you've got the basic understanding of how you can get up and open your eyes and breathe, then I think you'll be all right. Because I don't see a calf not having its mother. Well, obviously, if the human race want that calf to be alive for whatever purpose, for meat eating, for dairy, or even something to look at or something to paint, it would be all right as long as they made sure it was okay. They can take it away from its mum and it's not going to die as long as they take on that. What's the word? Maternal? Matron? I don't know. Being a mother. As long as they take on that role of being a mother, then that calf's going to be all right. But I guess on the other end, you have got the cow that is then now left without the calf.
The calf about their parent, and there is the process of mourning, and dairy cows have been shown to show a kind of a symbol of mourning. They call out for one another, and they do display very strong maternal bonds. Which would that not be cruel then?
Be cruel. I mean, you see it. I used to look at the end of my bedroom window when I was growing up, where you could see the field of the farm, and it would be the mum and the calf always together. You would see loads of them around, dotted in the field. It would be cruel to take it away, but then again, I don't know how you could get around that. So I'm not saying I'm offering a way to get around it, but there is some way that we just haven't figured out yet about you can get around separating a mother and a calf and still making each one of them know that they're going to be all right.
But are they going to be all right?
Well, in my view, they would be. But that's down to us to do that. It's not down to meat eaters to do that. It's not down to vegans to do that. It's not down to vegetarians to do that. It's us coming together rather than always shouting and pointing fingers like, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this. Ethically, it's wrong to take them away. But equally, if people can work together to find a solution to the mass production of meat and even local farming, the problems that come within that is that not everywhere, where am I going to get a local farm in the middle of London? There isn't one in Hyde Park. There's the Vauxhall petting zoo, but that's it. You're not going to get meat from there. You've got the problem of where are you going to get this meat from and how are you going to mass send it out, basically, to make sure everyone has an equal amount.
But that system is idealistic because it can never happen, because that requires one of two things: either people reduce their meat consumption by like 98% or 99%, or these products become so expensive because they're produced in such small quantities that only the very rich and wealthy can afford them, which is how it used to be. The Cove. I really was interested to know, what about the Cove upset you?
Dolphins are my favourite animal, and I went to Gran Canaria in summer on holiday with my partner, and we went on this boat tour where you go and watch the dolphins, and it was like the best thing ever. My camera roll was about 6 scrolls through just of pictures, and they would literally come up to the boat and they would like jump over and everything, and it's all completely like there's no harming them. The boat, because this is what I was concerned about before I went. Are they literally in a net and we're going up to this net and seeing it and we don't know about it? But no, it's really friendly. The dolphins will literally, the intelligence of the dolphins to come up and like interact with you. I was on the plane home, like the next day I was just staring at my phone for 4 hours for the whole flight from Spain. And it was that, like, I hadn't seen a dolphin in real life before I watched The Cove. And after I did, it really changed my after watching it, I changed my opinion. And then seeing one in real life, it's like, how could someone do that I mean, I don't eat fish at all. I just personally, I don't like the smell, I don't like the taste. I don't like the whole thing with like mass fishing, which is obviously no different to meat. I think fish, it always stemmed from a kid, I didn't like it, so I've just carried on with that. But The Cove was the documentary itself was so like eye-opening about how they had to sneak into the Cove to go and film was quite like interesting, I think.
Do you think the fact that the fishermen would eat the dolphins afterwards, does that provide any justification for them killing the dolphins?
I mean, if they killed them and they wanted to eat them, like that's how most people...
Which is what they do.
Yeah. They showed that the mercury levels that were found in the dolphin were found in like the tuna and the school dinner of everyone. All the kids in like the local schools were eating it as well. They had no idea. It's the same with like the horse meat scandal, putting this stuff in other stuff that you don't know about, which is quite a dangerous thing, to be honest.
With the horse meat scandal, how did that make you feel? Were you kind of like, oh, I don't care, it's horse, or were you a bit like, I don't like that? And if you didn't, well, were you happy or unhappy with it?
I can't even remember my reaction.
Me neither.
It was like how long ago was it? Like 5 years ago? But what I was more concerned about is that they found it in relatively, like, it was like Tesco value. It was in the cheaper side of meat, which is what some people can only afford. Some people can't afford, like, even just like the normal basic Tesco stuff, so they get that. And then they find this out, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's somewhat in a sense of disregarded them as not human beings but as consumers that will just put the shit stuff in with you, which you kind of expect, but it's still, I don't know, it's kind of demoralizing, I guess, for those kind of people.
Do you think that morally, there is a difference between eating a Tesco value lasagna made from cows or a Tesco value lasagna made from horses, or even a Tesco value lasagna made from dolphins? Do you think that morally there's anything different between those three options?
In what sense, morally, like?
In the sense of, is eating a cow ethical because they're a cow, and eating a dolphin unethical purely because they're a dolphin, and a horse in the middle? Or
it obviously depends on culture. I obviously never eating fish, like Japanese culture and especially Asian culture in general. There's a wide fish market over there because it is an island. There is one here as well. Fish and chips is like one of our staple like well-known heritage dishes, which I've only ever had like twice. But it kind of depends where you come from. In France, they do eat horses. In China, they eat dogs. Like you can't do a one-size-fits-all approach for the world about eating meat, because you go to Japan, their diet is fish. You go to like America, their diet is probably meat. And it all comes back to I can't remember what it's called. I learned it in geography years and years ago. It's called like the rice and potato line, where rice, it's a line that goes up and down over the globe, and you've got the top half normally eats potatoes as their staple carbohydrate, and the bottom half eats rice as their staple carbohydrate. You've got to think about, not necessarily like rice and potatoes, but meat. Where is the meat line, and where is it going?
Well, should culture be a determining factor of morality, or should culture and morality be separate?
I think it should be completely like a determining factor. I think it would be rude and it would be unethical to disregard India's cultures against for cows. Completely. Like, and you can't say globally this is what we're going to do when obviously some cultures are not going to like it. Even if it's the tiniest culture, it still has an impact. Like, we're trying to all be equal in modern day. We're all trying to work together, and it's just not really happening. So you've got to think. I mean, I have no insight into how it would work in 10 years' time with like meat consumption, but you've got to have the understanding that some people don't want to eat cows, and some people will want to eat meat, but it will be a completely different type of consumption 10 years down the line, because hopefully we won't be mass producing cows, and we won't be like growing chicken and clean slime for KFC and stuff like that.
So, if we think that culture should be, a huge determining factor in what's considered moral, what about something like female genital mutilation? Is that now a moral practice because it's cultural, or is it still an immoral practice?
You mean like Jack the Ripper, female genital?
I mean like the process of FGM where girls have their genitals mutilated as a form of kind of like castration upon them. It's often done in I guess Islamic countries. It's very much a traditional practice. Is it moral purely because it's cultural?
Not necessarily, but that's a completely different like topic. I didn't actually know about that. It's kind of like weird. It's a whole thing with like girls not being able to drive. Some cultures are different to yours, and you have to somewhat accept them. But then I guess when it's a human, it's different, because I'm a human. If I was a cow, I would probably like, I don't care that a girl's getting mutilated because she's not allowed to have sex. I don't care that a woman's allowed to drive. Because I'm a human, I obviously care about it.
But do you not think that the things that unify, say, why we believe that a woman having her genitals mutilated is wrong, is because we acknowledge that there's suffering, that there's something, that there's an act of unnecessary, probably evil going on there. And although the comparison isn't whether or not a non-human animal's life is the same as a human's life, the comparison is both of these actions are wrong because they involve suffering on the part of someone else. So the cow suffers, the pig suffers, the chicken suffers, the dog suffers. They all suffer, and because of that, there should be a line in how far culture can drive morality.
I agree. I think the suffering there should be a line with suffering, and with every type of suffering, suffragettes, the Holocaust, everything like that. There is a line. The Vietnam War, there is a line of suffering, but it comes down to how much is exposed. Like Cowspiracy was all about how much the media is not showing you, as much as it was about how much meat is harming the earth. Exactly. So it comes to the point where how much of that suffering is exposed. Where do you draw the line between? Like, where would you draw the line between mass producing cows and producing them on a sense that, because I don't think you're going to make the whole world go vegan in like a year. I don't think you're going to make them go in 50 years, possibly 100, but it just depends. How can you convince people to, I mean, you half convinced me. I didn't know about the female mutilation, but if I had that if I had something equally as, not harmful necessarily, because it's not like a fight, but equally political up my sleeve about veganism, obviously people are going to use it. So it depends how much, I'm going around in circles here, how much you expose the public to, and where is the line between being able to eat meat but it not being a luxury item, not being available for like the upper class, and not people who don't have as much income within their household. I don't know where the line would be.
For me, that line is it will always be the line of unnecessary suffering. So we have to identify, sometimes suffering is necessary, and in which case we can justify that. Maybe war would be an example of that. World War II, where undoubtedly there was suffering, but it was a justified action to do that. But in the case of harming animals, for you and I in London, or even in Somerset, wherever we are in England, there's not a necessity in place for us to have to do these things. We can get protein and iron and zinc and calcium from plant-based sources. So with that in mind, it's not a necessity, and for me that's where that kind of line should be drawn. And I strongly believe in what you're saying about like a process of, I guess, education and just kind of influencing people and more sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I feel like often there's this vibe where vegans are forcing beliefs, and I wish vegans would just live and let others do as they please. And I always say, first of all, you can never force someone to do something they don't want to do, in terms of a lifestyle choice. I can't, when you leave this conversation, you can go and get chicken from the canteen. I can't determine whether or not you do that. But what we can try and do is influence people to make more informed decisions based on how they truly feel. Now, I don't doubt for a second from what you said to me that you're someone who obviously cares about, humans especially, but also non-human animals as well. And so it's kind of making that parallel or drawing that kind of line in your head where you say, okay, I do care about these animals, and so therefore, do I have to, inflict suffering upon them if I don't have to? And if I don't have to, then how do I justify that action when there's an abundance of other alternatives? And so, I guess I've said a lot of things, and I don't want to overload you, but the question would be, how do you justify that action in a society where you don't have to?
I guess it is difficult. It's like the whole thing when you're on a plane, you put your mask on before you assist a child. People will, or should, I don't know, maybe they should. They look out for themselves before other people, and everyone's quite selfish. It depends what kind of person you are. But it's also that question of, like, when I was growing up and I went out to a pub and you see local Somerset pork, it comes with some sort of heritage, but it also comes with knowing that it's probably come from a farm that's 5 minutes up the road, and you probably know the guy that grew the meat.
But all farms are local to someone. Even industrialized farms will be local to someone. So the idea of local eating equaling ethical is disingenuous for a couple of reasons, but mainly because it's always going to be local. And pigs especially, an overwhelming, like 90% of them are factory farmed. And I feel like we've talked a lot about the local farming. So actually, let's say that we do have a system of farming, okay? Let's say we tick all the boxes of what it is that we've been talking about. So the animals are raised in great conditions. They're looked after by the farmers. We've managed to make it so that everyone can afford it, so there's not a class issue or a wealth issue as well. Fundamentally, the animals still have to be killed, right? So even if we give them a long, virtuous life that ticks the boxes for our needs, they still have to go to a slaughterhouse, right? And how do we make that action of killing them a moral action?
Is there not a way around that? I mean, obviously you don't want to wait for the animal to die every time, because you can't be like, oh, this pig's getting old, we're going to eat it roughly 5 to 6 weeks when it's dead. You can't do that, and people are not going to... I mean, you can do it, but you're not going to want to wait every 5 to 6 weeks when you're going to get your next sausage from. So, I mean, like, Greggs would go out of business.
Or they go vegan, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. I see it more. It's coming now as a trend. It started off as a trend, in my opinion. I don't want to offend anyone. It started off as a trend. Veganism, gluten-free, it's all started as a trend. And it's becoming now more towards... Okay, now that we're actually opening our eyes to this. But again, takes us back to that point, where do you cut the cord? And there was this... I had a talk from someone, like an author, when I was about 9 years old, and she wrote this book. She was telling us about this book, and she brought up this story that's made into a film. I can't remember what it's called. It's basically about this guy that falls down a crevasse in like a mountain once they go mountaineering, and touching the cord or touching the void is what it's called. It's where do you cut that rope to know that the person that's on the other end of the rope is 2 feet off the ground, 10 feet off the ground, 60 feet off the ground. And this guy cut the cord. Luckily, the guy that was hanging on... I'm going to start halfway through the story here, actually. They fell down the crevasse. He cut the cord, thinking that this guy was going to be all right. And luckily, he was like 1 foot away from the ground. It's where do we cut the cord as human beings? Where do we make sure that we're going to be okay, but the animals are going to be okay as well? How do you ethically farm? It just takes us back to that.
But the thing is, like, I guess with the analogy of the cord is there's no illusion, or not illusion, but there's no confusion about how far the drop is. To eat meat, an animal has to die. It's not. They're not going to be okay. They will die. And so even if we give them a really good life, I almost think that somehow is an element of extra cruelness there, because it's an element of betrayal. An animal that lives 6 weeks in a horrible farm, death for them is a small mercy. But an animal who gets named and is looked after and who is cherished, by the farmer, when they're taken to a slaughterhouse to be killed in the exact same way as the factory farmed animal, it's a betrayal because they've been given the illusion of love or the illusion of companionship, which is then taken away from them. And so there's no mercy in their death at all. In fact, their death is the opposite of a mercy. And so even if we give these animals a good life, there's still a point where they have to be taken to a slaughterhouse, and they're still going to be have their throat cut, or they're going to be put in a gas chamber, or whatever it is, whichever method it is that we choose to kill them. And so because of that action alone, that's always going to be a cruel action, because it is an unnecessary action. I mean, do you think there is a humane way to kill an animal? And if you do, can you define what humane means to you?
I'm pretty sure I saw on the news that they plucked a feather out of a chicken, grew the meat from it, and then, yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, you come back to that, and straight away you're just saying, like, lab rat. And the lab rat, that it has such that signifier of those two words together has obviously such a bad meaning in everyone's head. But is that not a way forward? I mean, of course it's a way forward.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, you can't expect everyone to completely cut off meat eating like straight away. But the whole point is how humane is humane? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I've never really killed anything, to be honest with you. Not even like a fly or a spider. You learn to live with them when you're young. I don't know. I think humane killing is obviously a question that we can apply to a lot of things. The Holocaust, everything, even like the Cove, going back to stuff like this. Humane killing is a difficult subject because people have different ways that they think it could work. Hitler obviously thought that he was doing a humane thing when clearly he wasn't. But I don't really know where I'm going with this, if I'm honest with you, but I don't know how to define humane.
And this is the thing, these words are used very subjectively rather than objectively, and I think this is one of my issues with the word humane, is how it's been diluted. I mean, the kind of core definition of humane is to show or have compassion or benevolence. And so for me, if we align humane, compassion and benevolence as three words meaning the same thing, the question would be then, how do you compassionately or benevolently take the life of an animal if they don't need to die? I mean, can you do that?
Necessarily at the moment you can't, but I'm sure I'm not a very clever person when it comes to stuff like this, but I'm sure there would be one way that you'd be able to not necessarily take the life, but find what you want from that animal without hurting it. Because it comes down to like human friendships as well. How can your friend's got the new iPhone, how do you take that away from them? Well, I mean, that's a bad example. I don't know how you could put it into like a human context, but you've always want something that someone else, the grass is always green on the other side. You always want something else, but I don't know. How can you do it? How can you define it?
You mentioned lab-grown meat. I will end it in a minute because I realise I've been keeping you for a long time. The lab-grown meat, yeah, that's a viable solution because it doesn't involve suffering and death of an animal. You take a feather and then you can just reproduce their DNA and their genes over and over again, which is great. You know, that takes away literally any animal and any suffering. So that's a viable solution, but that's different to ethical farming, right? So I think maybe what we can agree on is that the best solution is a solution that doesn't involve killing an animal, wherever possible, which is always possible.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. I think also the only thing, you go into the thing like, how can you get, like, is the point you made earlier, is how can you get a chicken to say yes to its feather being taken out? I don't know if that hurts for a chicken or anything. Like, I used to pick like the hairs off of my arm when I was a kid. So obviously it's different. How can you get the chicken's consent to that? And how can you also then you have a problem then if there is a problem with the DNA that you use, and then that is being reproduced, and that it's basically everyone's going to be eating the same chicken in about, I don't know how long it would take, like 5 years' time, they'd be eating the same DNA of a chicken, because you could literally have the earth with one chicken, pluck one hair, and you could produce all this stuff from it. But then it goes to the question, if there's a problem with it, it goes down the chain. And if it goes down the chain, does it get worse and worse, the quality or anything? So there is problems within solutions that people have found already. Yep. So it's, how do we move forward in the next 5-10 years to find a solution to this?
And for me, I think also, I just want to say one thing about inferred consent, in the sense of if we can infer that the chicken would rather have the feather plucked than have their throat cut, that would be an inferred. But I don't think we should really be eating lab-grown meat. I don't think it's very good. It doesn't make sense to me. For me, and I'll probably leave this, and this could be slightly disingenuous of me to leave it on this point, but for me, the solution is already there in front of us. It's simply just plant-based, just vegan. You know, it eradicates the suffering of animals, eradicates the potential safeguarding issues of lab-grown meat, and we can get everything we need from it, and it aligns with those values of let's not hurt others if we don't have to.
I mean, I somewhat agree, but then you're hurting a plant still. So how can you do that? I work in a kitchen. I literally work over the river in a boat, and trading what we have vegan cheese. I've tried it, and I thought never again. No offense. I don't want to eat plastic. We're trying to get rid of it in the world.
Brutal.
Yeah, a horrible point to me to end it on. But it does come back to the thing, why would you want to make cheese if you're like vegan? Why would you want to make vegan chicken nuggets? Why would you want to... You're appealing to the market that have come from eating meat and are now coming off of it. Maybe it's like a weaning thing, weaning them off of meat like a baby. But is that going to go away? Like, what do you then turn it into? I don't know.
Two things. This is what I love about these conversations, is because there's always something else to talk about. If you want to stop at any point, please just stop. Two things. The plant thing's interesting. I always say to people, there's two arguments you can take. The first is you can argue from a biological standpoint and say that plants have no pain receptors, no brain, no central nervous system, and therefore they can't feel pain. Okay. So you don't believe that plants feel pain, or?
No, not at all. And I grew up eating nettle soup as well. I thought it was great. So I don't like a plant is something that someone will consciously go and pick on their way home from school to give to their mum. It's not the same as an animal. It doesn't have a face, an eye, a mouth, a nose. But then it comes back to the whole thing about how can you... It's like anti-abortion stuff. How can you personify... Like an anti-abortion would personify the fetus in an anti-abortion polemic. Like, it's the same that you're going to do with animals, I guess.
I'm glad that the only reason I started talking about plants is you have no idea how many people tell me all the time that plants have feelings all the time. So, and the final thing that you said was about why do we make things like chicken nuggets and stuff. And I think fundamentally it's because the thing about being vegan is we don't give up. Most people, speaking from personal experience, I didn't give up these products because I stopped enjoying them. I absolutely loved how they tasted. And so it helps people at transitioning and want to get the same flavors and stuff. But it's also a signifier that veganism is an ethical standpoint rather than a purely dietary or taste standpoint. And for me, that's why we do it. Not because, because we still enjoyed those flavors and we gave it up because we felt morally compelled to do so.
I think that's what people don't know is that there is an ethical point. I think what people normally see it, you think of it as a cake. You've got a vegan cake. So you've got like the dietary point is the top layer. The ethical point is the jam in the middle. No one knows that it's there. That's a really bad analogy, but it's how you need to apply to me today is you've made it an ethical point rather than a dietary requirement. I never really thought about that. I knew about it, but I didn't really know so much into it. That's what you've got to do. I'm not a marketing expert here. I want to go into advertising and marketing, but I'm not an expert here. My point would be make the ethical bit the top on point. You don't want to make anyone feel guilty about themselves, but you want to encourage them that it's something that they need to think about and act on, in a sense that when they go out and they go and get food, they're not buying as much meat. They don't have to have meat every night, every meal. 14 times a week. They don't have to have meat 14 times a week, at least.
And so, as a final question, would you say that maybe I'd made you think about something differently than, from an ethical perspective, than you had before?
Yeah. I'm kind of convinced. It's a bit weird. I would still drink and eat dairy and everything, but meat consumption, I definitely think about it. Of course I would.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. A real pleasure speaking to you.